Hello, my name is Sam Killins. I'm a missionary in Colombia, South America. Right now I'm in the plaza of a town on the outskirts of Bogota, and as you can see we have the Catholic Cathedral right behind us. The doors are closed like many other institutions, but the church planting that I've been involved in is actually very relevant for this situation. We kind of get under the radar because we meet in apartments and in theater houses and in restaurants and in parks, and that way we can kind of connect with people face to face while still trying to maintain a certain level of precaution. So I started out my missionary career as a church planter out in one of the more hostile jungle regions of Colombia. I remember feeling pretty ambitious and excited at the beginning, and hitting the ground running, and trying to share the gospel with anyone I could on the street, and kind of hitting a wall and realizing that this wasn't as easy as I had anticipated. I started feeling a little bit overwhelmed, a little confused, a little lonely. And there was one day where I was walking by a soccer field, and there were two teams about to start a game, and I just sat down to watch. And one of the guys, he came up to me and he asked me if I played soccer, because they only had 10 players for their team and they needed an 11th to start the game. So I was like, yeah, I'll play, and I jumped in, and miraculously enough I scored a goal, and so that gave me the credibility to then be invited back to play with these guys. And eventually we became friends, and we started meeting in the house of the goalie, and we started opening up the scriptures and just trying to understand a little bit who Jesus was and grapple with the teachings of this person called Jesus Christ, who my friends eventually started to understand as being the Son of God as well. It was a cool experience. After 2 years, that church was strong enough so that I could hand it off to the leadership of some other New Tribes missionaries from Colombia that continued on with that ministry, and to this day that church is still functioning. So after this, I moved to the capital city of Colombia, to Bogota, which has about 9 million people, and I became a part of the same church that I had grown up in, that my dad had started. And I had a lot of friends that were still active in the church, and so we decided to start a young adults group, and we would meet together in different people's apartments and study the scriptures together. Sometimes we would go ride our bikes, or play board games, or cook a meal together, and just have this strong community where we could encourage one another, and we could also invite other friends from the university or from our workplace, and just try to apply the principles from scripture in our everyday life. So then from that young adults group, there were about 5 of us that lived more towards the midtown sector of the city, and we decided we wanted to start a church in this trendy hipster area of town. But nevertheless, we would gather together there, and we would take part in the Lord's Supper, and we started inviting some more of our friends. Eventually we got kicked out because our music was a little bit too loud, and so we started meeting in a restaurant, and then in a hotel conference center, and sometimes in a park. We also started getting involved in a homeless ministry in the downtown area, and it was through that ministry that we then started going out to different foundations. And in one of those foundations, surprisingly enough, I met my present wife, Alejandra, and in the place that I least expected God to show me who the love of my life was going to be, I found her, and we just got married about 3 weeks ago. And it's awesome to see how God has been orchestrating all these things. That church that was started about 4 years ago in that tea house has since created about 4 other new churches that have about 20 people each in different areas all throughout Colombia. So then in that homeless ministry, we started realizing that there were a lot of Venezuelan immigrants that started coming to receive some of the bread and the hot drinks that we were giving out. And so I asked them where they were living, and they took me to a rundown hotel where they would pay about $3 a night. And so right there in the hallway of that hotel, we started praying and sharing the gospel and playing music, and that just really intrigued me a lot more about what the situation was like for those crossing over from Venezuela. So that prompted me to go out to a town called Cucuta. It's actually a city of 1 million people, and there are thousands and thousands of Venezuelan immigrants that are crossing into Colombia every day, both legally and illegally. And as I was there, I started interacting with some of the street musicians, with some street vendors, and I started meeting with them, and I started a Bible study there. And eventually I just decided to move out to Cucuta. That was kind of where the most need was, and the church that I had started in Bogota was up and running, and there were very capable leaders that were continuing on with the work. And so as I kept sharing the gospel and doing Bible studies, we eventually started renting out a hotel conference room right there in Cucuta, and another church was born. And so right before the pandemic, I decided to invite a Venezuelan family to pastor that group, as then I went back to Bogota. So when I was in Bogota, originally we started meeting online, and the problem was that a lot of my Venezuelan friends weren't able to participate. And well, I basically went out to a refugee camp, and then I even invited some of my Venezuelan immigrant friends that I had met in Cucuta but had moved to Bogota and were playing their instruments on the street, and along with them we were sharing the gospel. And we ran into a Venezuelan evangelist who also happened to go to that same refugee camp with the same purpose, and with him we joined forces, and we started meeting on the rooftops and in a park on Sunday mornings. And there too another group sprang to life of about 20 new Venezuelan immigrants, with which we've been meeting even to this day. Now this may be getting hard to believe, but in the midst of all of this, one of my closest friends, the guy that I had been discipling the most, I had given him the proposition earlier on that maybe we could start up a group with some of his friends from high school. And so he was telling me, like, you want to come and give it a shot? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I called up one of my other close friends that had been helping me when I started the church in Cucuta. And so Juan is connected with all his former classmates, started doing Bible studies, and I would go on the weekends, and we basically started up a Bible study on Wednesdays, and then we also started taking the Lord's Supper on Sundays. Now you may ask, how is it possible that on Sunday I can be involved in two different groups, one with the Venezuelans and the one that we just started up here in Duitama 3 hours away? Well, we basically moved the time of our meeting for the Venezuelan group in the evening, and the morning group in Duitama takes place from 9 to 11, and then I just jump in this old car as soon as the meeting's over, and I head back to Bogota, and at 4 o'clock we have the meeting with our other Venezuelan immigrant friends. And what's interesting is that in this whole trip from Duitama back to Bogota, there's frequently a lot of immigrants that are just walking, that have come from Venezuela and that are trying to get to Bogota. And so I'm often able to pick them up, and on some occasions even just take them to the church, and we'll collect an offering and give them some money to help them out, or give them some food, give them some encouragement, share the gospel to them. Sometimes that's the last we'll ever see of them, but it's cool how in the midst of starting this other church, like, there's always like 2 or 3 new people that I bring with me every time. So that's a little bit of my story. and I hope it can be an encouragement for you to also start thinking a little bit outside the box and how you can make disciples and plant churches in unconventional contexts in any way, shape, or form.